Omakase, the life and words of author M. Kieran. If this is our first time meeting each other, let me give you a brief introduction. My name is Max. I write books for a living. My pronouns are they, them. And if I must be entirely honest, today is a strange day. I am filled with excitement. There's a lot of exciting things happening today, especially on the day that I'm recording this podcast. But I'm also filled with another sentiment, a little bit of an embarrassment and shame. Not anything related to the podcast, but something that happened during my week. And I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't make any mistakes, I didn't hurt anybody's feelings. But I experienced something again, and it brought out of me new feelings. And we'll be talking about re-experiencing something that you grew up with in the first segment of the show. Hi there. My name's Max. This is my writing advice podcast, Omakase. If you're unfamiliar with the format, it goes like this. The first third is all about my week, my process, my creative adventures, what I've been doing, what I've been up to, what media I've been consuming. The second segment is viewer questions. Today we're going to be talking about writing, creative writing when English is not your first language, and what to do about those pesky I's in first-person narration. What happens when it feels like every paragraph starts with I? And for the final segment of the show, we have the prompt, a creative exercise, or in this case, an idea. We're going back to proper form. I was digging around through my envelope. I actually keep them in an envelope of just story ideas. I picked one up because I've been kind of interested in working on something, a little idea that I was reminded about. And I examined it and I realized I currently do not have the time to work on this story, so I'm instead going to give it to you. We'll be going over the Warrior of Dawn and the Warrior of Dusk over on the prompt part of the show. Before we get started with the show proper, I want to let you know, is it 2 or 3 items of housekeeping? Welcome back to the housekeeping segment of the show. In the description down below of this podcast/video, you will find a bunch of links, including the song that you hear in the show, titled Dream of Green by the OC Jazz Collective. One of my friends was recently making fun of me for shouting them out every week, but I have to! It's what you gotta do. They made this amazing track that you hear, and I just love it. It's a remix of one of my favorite video games of all time. I gotta let you know about them. The OC Jazz Collective. I also really love their name because, as you all know, OC is an acronym, and to us writers, an OC is an original character. But of course, that's not actually what it means. You can find a link to that song and actually download it. It's free to download. You can also find it on YouTube if you do a quick search for it. It's a fantastic song. Oh my god. I listen to it when I'm not editing this podcast. That's how much I love that song. Also, links to supporting me, treating me to a cup of coffee, supporting me on Patreon, all of that good stuff. My plans keep changing for December. I know that I said I was going to do an AMA. If you watched last week's episode, you know that's not happening anymore. Mostly because just time. I realized, I was talking with my lovely spouse, and I'm like, I feel that I need to ask 2 months in advance so that I can solidify everything. Not only ask you guys, but also ask people in my real life. It's not because, you may be wondering, Max, you appear to be a very organized person, and you're like, Max, I bet you have at least 2 calendars, and I'm like, of course I do. And part of that is because, the people in my life, not my lovely spouse, she's amazing, but my family, my extended family. I'm not throwing shade, but sometimes, not everyone is as proactive as I am. So sometimes I'm like, yeah, I already have plans for the end of the year, and then the family is like, by the way, we're gonna do this instead. And I'm like, guys, my tower of playing cards, my castle of playing cards, that is my plans for December, just topple down. So, that's life. But you know what we do? We keep on rolling by. You make a plan, you can make another plan. Adapt, change, evolve. Transform yourself, both physically and mentally. What am I talking about? What am I even saying? Hey there. Yesterday my lovely wife and I were playing games. We have another channel where we play games and we just have fun. We're very silly people. It's the complete polar opposite of this podcast. If you like Serious Max, just listen to this podcast. If you like to think that I'm a cool person who never loses their cool and who never says ridiculous things just for the sake of making their wife just laugh, then keep listening to this podcast. I actually had a dear viewer who finally met me, because I have a gaming Discord, a Discord server where you can just chat with me and play games with me. And one of them was so nervous to meet me. They were like, oh my god, what if Max thinks I'm lame? And then they met me and they realized I am lame. And then they were mad because they were like, I was so nervous to meet you. And I'm like, see, that's what you get for thinking that I'm cool. Anyhow, now that we're talking about me, let's move over to my week. And I'm realizing, sometimes I'm like, I gotta stay true. I gotta let you all know that I am a big dork. But now we're gonna talk about me being embarrassed about rewatching old movies. So, I've been creating, I've been writing. It hasn't been the easiest process, I'm not gonna lie to you. I almost feel, I'm feeling that urge to restart. I'm feeling that urge to start over again, and I might do it. I don't know. I have to analyze my own feelings. My lovely wife, of course, is amazing. Takes such good care of me and inspires me to just keep on going. So I think I will keep doing that. Writing, being creative, going on walks is staying motivated. I've been listening to music basically all the time when I'm at the house. Whether it is cleaning or just walking or just, spending time just listening to music, imagining the characters, thinking about the story. It's been great. So what else did I do this week? Well, since there's a big video game coming out relatively soon, don't worry, I'm not going to talk about video games. That's for the end of the video club. But since both my lovely wife and I realized a big game's coming out and we're going to be playing it for like a month straight. So we thought, let's watch some movies. Let's actually do something else because we're not going to be doing this for the next month or so. And, you do that thing. There's no way you don't do this thing. I don't know a single person who actually opens Netflix and goes, okay, this is where we're going to watch. Half of the Netflix session is spent you just looking for things to watch. That's the way that it works. That's just human nature. Don't tell me that you're that kind of person. I won't believe you. I won't believe you. You actually go through your watch lists? That's silly. You're not a real person. Take off that mask. You're an alien. Look at them, everybody. That's not a real person. I won't be tricked. So we thought, I'm not going to name the movie because I already feel bad enough, but I thought, hey, let's watch this movie from a few years back. I remember really liking it. I proposed the idea. I proposed like 2 movies. I'm actually glad that we watched the one we did and not the other one, because the other one, I was already reminded of bad stuff. And also the director of the second movie came out to be a really, really bad person. So I'm like, we were already kind of on pins and needles. So I figured, you know what, let's watch the one that I think has aged pretty well. Max said, being an absolute fool. It's interesting seeing how culture itself has changed. Although, this will connect back to the prompt of the day. This is a very Western culture thing. The idea of permanence, the idea of things being the way that they are and being like that forever, or having always been like that, or staying like that forever. I don't want to immediately liken it to the idea that, nobody ever wants to die, everybody wants to live forever, but at least we like to perceive things as to have always been how we imagine them now in the present. But that's just not the way that time works, or that real life works, or culture works. Things change over time. Culture changes, develops over time. So we went back to watch a movie from, let's say, there's no way it's like 10 years ago. Let's say like 6 years ago. And I thought 6 years ago, it's not that old. There's no way that it aged that badly. And then we realized it did. And it was not only a nature of the comedy of the movie, which was absolutely entirely punching down, which, it isn't fun. Leaves a nasty taste in the back of your mouth. But most importantly, there was an absolute lack in this movie of questioning the central idea of the plot. It's the sort of movies that I remember that I watched growing up, and I thought, oh, what a cool concept. And I never questioned, what that concept was saying, or I never questioned the ultimate meaning of what the story was saying. And now that I'm older, and now that I am more focused on storytelling, now that I'm, doing novels for a living, and now that this is a part of my life, I question that wherever I go. I think about it, I analyze it critically. And we were watching that movie, and I thought to myself, wow, this is a horrible message. This is a terrible message for a movie. And I'm like, the main character is a horrible person. And I'm like, the movie sells the main character as being kind of like flawed, but I'm like, no. They have earned every single bad thing that's happened to them. And they ruin every life they come across. Jesus Christ, this is a terrible movie. So, why am I telling you all this? I don't want to do, the act of punching down. I don't want to just be here rambling about a movie, but what I want to get to is a principle that... And it's funny that this is happening again, because last year, if you remember my vlogs, back before I started the podcast, about a year ago, my lovely spouse and I rewatched the original Star Wars movies. She had never seen them. Ironically, she actually watched the Star Wars movies in chronological order. She watched episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. I believe, we did watch Rogue One together. And then we watched episode 4, 5, 6, 7, and then The Last Jedi? Is that 8? We watched them in order. I grew up watching the Star Wars movies. Back when I lived in Mexico, every Saturday, channel number 9 would have a trilogy. Starting at around 5 p.m., it would play 3 movies back to back. Even if it wasn't a trilogy, it would still play 3 movies. Even if it was something like, like a Friday the 13th movie, and, a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and then some other random horror movie. 3 movies back to back. So, of course, the Star Wars, trilogy at the time would always play would play every once in a while. Episode 4, Episode 5, and Episode 6. So, rewatching the original trilogy with my lovely spouse, who had never seen it, just like rewatching that movie that I'm talking about that we saw on Netflix, she had never seen it. It brought this interesting experience where I was purposefully rewatching it with brand new eyes. Questioning everything. Analyzing everything. Attempting to enjoy the movie, because it's not just a matter of, taking notes. I'm not treating it like an exercise. I'm trying to have fun. But much like time changes and culture changes, our perceptions change, and our tastes change. And our sensibilities change. And I know this may sound like the worst thing ever, but I actually kind of recommend doing this exercise with you and someone who has never seen a movie. Or even just you by yourself. Rewatching something from the past and actually and analyzing it. To find the things that inspired you when you were young, that, filled you with wonder and excitement, but also to revise those feelings. To seek to find something new. A new lesson, regardless of whether it is something good or something bad. And I know that I'm about to bring up Star Wars, and I know that's gonna be just fuel for arguments in the comments down below. But I used to really like the Star Wars movies, but then I rewatched them, and then I used to think that Empire Strikes Back was my favorite, and then I rewatched it, and I realized just how slow that movie is, and I realized just how dreadfully slow that movie is. And then I rewatched Return of the Jedi, and my wife and I both naturally burst out into laughter when Boba Fett just dies. And then we both realized that Boba Fett did absolutely nothing. Boba Fett was just in the background, never did anything, never said anything. You have this really cool idea for a character who absolutely does nothing and dies at the first chance he has. And then we laughed. We laughed because it was ridiculous. And I don't think that was the feeling we were supposed to be feeling. It's like, we're supposed to think this guy's cool, but he just dies. He just dies. He does nothing. It felt like the most obvious, here is an action figure you can buy. Did we find a place for him in the story? Nah, just dump him. Just dump him in the Sarlacc pit. It's fine. It's fine. And I know what you're thinking. Someone out there is like, Max, that sounds like the worst thing to do. I don't want to go back to the stuff that I liked growing up. I don't want to stop liking it. And I'm not saying you have to stop liking things. The exercise here is to analyze media, to look at it, question it, think of it critically, and seek to find the things that can help you improve. The movie that we watched, a few nights ago, that I remembered thinking that it was like an 8 with a lot of amazing visuals and a creative idea for a story, that got down to like a 2. I analyzed it and I was thinking about it, and the best part of that movie, honestly, was during the credits when my lovely spouse and I were talking about what would have made that story better. How you could have actually tackled that really delicate subject, not only with grace, and with tact, but also in such a cool, amazing way that would have brought everything together. The pieces were on the table. Everything that you needed to tell a really exciting story was there, but the execution was just bad. The execution was endlessly ineffective. And that right there, it is that feeling of seeing how someone tried to pull something off, but didn't. That is a bountiful wealth of inspiration. It really is. I came out of that thinking, okay, if I was gonna write something like this, I wouldn't do any of what they did. That's for sure. And I feel like this brings us back to the idea of learning from other people's mistakes. Because life is too darn short to make all the mistakes yourself. I'm still embarrassed. I remember hyping up the movie before we pressed play. And I'm still a little embarrassed. I'm a little ashamed. But I was a different person back then when I first watched it. I am a different person now. And if anything, I had so much fun experiencing that again with my lovely spouse. It was fun. And again, that credit sequence, it was the best. Because we were talking back and forth about stories, which we both love. Talking about the characters, about their little arcs, what would have made them better, what would have actually made them amazing. That right there is the most fun. I want to inspire you to grab a VHS of something you liked back in the day. Or a DVD, depending on your age range. Or find it on Netflix. Put it on and analyze it. Think about it. Not only the visuals, the music, the aesthetics, the dialogue. The way that the camera treats its characters. For the camera is our narrator. That's important stuff. Okay? Okay. I went really long on this segment. Also, you have no idea. Oh man. I'm glad that I only picked Boba Fett, because I could have just gone on for days about the original Star Wars movies. And in case you were asking, because I know someone's yelling at me, Max, which is the best of the original 3 Star Wars movies? The first one. It has the least amount of baggage. It actually has a conclusion. And honestly, has pretty good pacing. It actually kind of does. Aside from a couple of things that make absolutely no sense, pretty enjoyable. But I feel like that's the problem of like the first parts, or movies that were made to be a standalone that later on become, like a series. They make it, it's a closed loop. It feels satisfying. And then the creators have to find more things to put on there to continue on with the story. But that right there is an exercise, a prompt even, for another day. Let's talk about the people who make this show possible. This podcast is here thanks to you, the lovely people making this podcast a reality. By supporting me through a cup of coffee, you can treat me to a single donation, a one-time donation, a cup of coffee, over in the link in the description down below. You can also support me through Patreon by giving me a small donation every month. I want to take a second to give a shout out to some of my most generous patrons. Everyone who pledges to my page, $1 and up, gets a shout out at the end of the show, in what we call the end of the video club. The following are, again, some of my most generous patrons. Beginning with Atilak. Atilak has a DeviantArt page. You can find out more about their writing and their art over at deviantart.com/ahtilak. Hero Song. Hero Song is writing LGBT plus positive novels. You can find all of their novels over at smashwords.org. Just do a quick search for Hero Song. And of course, a quick shout out to A. Howard, Elisa Dudley, Amelia, Angela, Brenda, Lishadra, Kristen Lofton, who bumped up their pledge. Thank you. Gilbert Gaudreau, Irina Phoenix. Yeah, Kristen, you think I didn't notice you bumped your pledge? You think I'm not looking? I looked, I noticed. Thank you for your support. Gilbert Gaudreau, Irina Phoenix, Lacey, Mark Maruska, Nicola, Pat Eichson, Polycraft Soul Muse, and Synexia. Thank you for your support, guys. Alright. Sorry for the long update. Sorry for rambling about, how guilty I was for making my spouse watch a terrible movie. And I know which of my friends is about to text me right now. One of my friends is literally like, okay, Max, tell me which movie it is. When I was talking about I read 2 really bad books back to back. I almost read them out of spite because they were just so bad. One of my friends just like immediately texted me when she was listening to the podcast, and she was like, Max, what books were they? I need to know. I must have the tea. And I'm like, don't tell anyone. But anyhow, you will never find out. You will never know. Unless I just tweet about it on Twitter. The first question of the day comes from my email box. I have an email. You can send questions over at omakasepodcast@gmail.com. That is omakasepodcast@gmail.com. It is in the description down below. Not omakase@gmail.com. Not the omakasepodcast@gmail.com. Definitely not mkaren@gmail.com. There's only one email. Now, this first question, it is something that I've tackled not only on the channel, but on the podcast before. I'm sure that I've just probably tackled it very quickly. But the email that I got was so detailed, and it allows me to have a very specific spin on the question, a different point of view that we can tackle. And I just gotta do it. So here we are, once again, talking about writing, creative writing, when English is not your first language. The writerly friend who sent this question is trilingual, and they described how English may be the one that they are the least confident about, but it is the one in which they want to write creative fiction. In their email, they talked about how, they've done a lot of studying, they have a lot of grammar books, a lot of dictionaries, they have all that stuff with them. And, they're actively learning, they're actively practicing it, but they feel as though they still have a long way to go. And they also brought up the other languages, the other languages that they speak. Excuse me. I think my cat's knocking at the door. But the other 2 languages that they speak, and how they all feel different, and how they feel as though they will never have the same handle of the language of English than they have of their primary language, or even, their secondary language. And I feel like this is something that I relate to very much as someone who's picking up yet another language, and as someone whose primary language now is not the one that they grew up with. I was born and raised in Mexico, and, Spanish was my primary language. When I moved to the US, I was probably around 13 or 14, and yes, I had learned a little bit of English back in Mexico, but it wasn't very good English. The biggest problem in English is phonetics, the way in which words are pronounced, which is a crapshoot every time. There is just no system. There's no way for you to know how each word is pronounced or how you're supposed to speak the language. I remember, actually, that when I came to the US, again, I was I think I turned 14 when I came to the US. I was reading and speaking English within 6 months. And the thing that took the longest time, and it's funny because here we are, the thing that took me the longest time was actually speaking. And I know that may seem weird, or maybe not, because there's times when I do sound a little bit funny. It took me a long time to be able to speak confidently. Mostly because pronouncing things in English is always a crapshoot. It always feels like rolling the dice, and depending on how often you use words in speech, like I forget what the actual number is, but I think you can just get by. You can just live in the US, just knowing something like 100 to 200 words. You can just get by. You can take care of most of the average conversations you're going to have with other human beings, just with having 100 to 200 words that you know. Done. So that brings all of those other miscellaneous words, the words that are outside of the common sphere of dialogue that come up in fiction. And sometimes really common words that you just never say out loud. And in the aspect of speaking, talking in English or speaking out loud, yeah, that becomes a problem. And it's funny, because learning another language is difficult. But now that I'm experiencing that again, I am learning Japanese again, and I'm 100 times farther than I've ever been before, and I'm noticing patterns now, and I'm having a lot of fun. And it's that thing where I am noticing things now without having to think about them twice. It's a sense of familiarity that feels great. But one of the things, and I swear this relates back to the point, follow me along, is that one of the perks, one of the really powerful things of knowing a lot of languages, and also of learning another language, is that you are actively learning and questioning the way that a new language works. You're looking for patterns. You are not only learning what a word is, but more often than not understanding where it came from. Understanding the origin of words. And this form of critical thinking is very important, because questioning the nature of reality, questioning why a word means what it is, or how a word fits in the puzzle that is forming a sentence, that ability to just question reality is key to developing stories, to creating amazing worlds, to look at the way things are now, and to imagine them being differently. So, getting back to the question, because I'm having a lot of fun talking about this. And even before I hit record, I had all these ideas of stuff that I want to talk about, and I'm kind of tackling them one by one. But the first thing, and just to kind of immediately get to the answer to the question, dear writerly friend, should you be writing in English, even though you don't feel very comfortable with your English at the moment? I think you should most definitely be writing in English, because that is the language that you ultimately want to be creating fiction in. And Yanto, oh my, right now, really? Everybody, sorry for the interruption. Let me just go get the baby. Hello, come in, good sir. Come in, good sir. Can you say hi to the viewers, Yanto? Oh, there's construction outside suddenly. Hi, Yanto. Uh-huh. He's... Don't stand on your mom's computer. Oh my god. I plop him on a surface and he's like, okay, time for me to stand on this laptop. He's looking around like he's never seen the room. Like like he's never seen Tommy Wiseau's The Room. Like it's the first time he's ever actually been in this office. Oh, he's happy. He's giving me the long blinks, which in cat, it means that he loves you, or that he's very comfortable with you. Back to the question. I think you should most definitely continue to write in English. Mostly because, unfortunately, nothing will make it easier. Like time passing, and even though, yes, studying more will help, but the practice itself of writing in English is not going to get better with time. That's just going to be a matter of sitting down, and as you said in the email, writing a lot of bad first drafts. And that's okay. And that's what happens sometimes. See, your first draft will still be sucky, even after you have mastered English. Which I don't think even I am at that point. But hey, that's life. The one thing that brings me a lot of solace, and that makes me feel a lot of relief, is knowing that we as writers have the amazing power, the amazing ability to edit our writing after we put it on paper. Unlike per se a surgeon. We don't have to get it right the first time. We are allowed to make mistakes, and I can assure you I make lots of mistakes. That's why I have an editor. That's why I reach out for feedback. I catch things that I wouldn't have caught myself. And my lovely spouse, we always argue about the placement of my commas. So, it's life. But that's part of the process, though. I don't want you to think. I don't want you to think for a second that writers whose English is their primary and only language don't do this or don't have to deal with this, because that's silly. I don't want you to be under the impression, I don't want you to get the false idea that writers whose English is their primary and only language do not have to ask for feedback or advice in regards to their sentence structure and the way that they tackle their writing. That is simply not true. Writers with decades of experience with English who only know the English language will still make sentence structure mistakes. Which brings me to the other thing I want to talk about. Also, excuse me for speaking very fast. If I must explain myself as to why sometimes I speak very fast, it is because I was born and raised in Mexico, but primarily in Jalisco and the capital of Jalisco, Guadalajara. And over there we're known for speaking very fast. That's it's part of being me. It's part of my programming. I have a lot to say, so I try to say it all real fast. So, the other thing I want to talk about is that you talked in your email about how you have all these books on grammar and dictionaries, and that's great. I think that's very important to learn. But you also mentioned in your email how you feel that the languages are different, and they are. Languages are different. The way in which we structure sentences, the way in which we present our thoughts are differently. And our elderly friend mentioned how their native tongue, I believe their native tongue, which is Portuguese, feels so much more fluid, and it feels like poetry to write, as opposed to Dutch or English, which are the other two languages that they know. They feel different. And I actually had to reflect on this a lot, because I don't want to say I disagree, because that's not the point of this question, or the point of my comment, is that I really enjoy writing in English. And I was wondering, about my feelings about writing in Spanish. And it's weird because thinking about this question actually forced me to, reflect on how I feel about Spanish. Spanish feels different to me than English. And I really enjoy writing in English, and I really believe that English can be very fun to write in. Spanish feels completely different to me. I sometimes think of Spanish as a little bit more mechanical, but there is a harshness to Castellano, which is of course the Spanish dialect of Mexico. There is a certain harshness to it, a very personal, especially when you're not being proper. There's a lot, and I will describe this. There's a very specific sentiment that I want to carry across, is that Castellano, real Castellano, not like proper, like, business like Castellano, carries with it a bunch of old words, all of which are of indigenous origin. And all these words are just part of the building blocks of Spanish. And when I think of pronouncing X's as J's, and when I think of the TL sound, this reminds me a lot. It feels very like home. But it's also a very harsh sound. It's it's a contrast with the amazing sense of hospitality and the feeling of being welcomed and the amazing, humble people that I, knew in my youth, compared to the harshness of the sounds of the language. And it feels very much like home. And it reminds me a lot because the city that I'm from is known as the City of Rain, because it rains a lot there. And it reminds me a lot of the sound of raindrops on the roof, on the streets, the harshness of the sound of the water colliding against the surface. This harshness, it's not the same as poetry, it's not the same as the language flowing beautifully, but it feels like home. And it makes me question whether, something has to feel like poetry to feel like fiction, or to flow well. And I'm reminded of English, which everybody describes English as being really hard and mechanical, but I don't feel that way. I really love writing in English. And I feel, you can see it. You can see it when I go over the prompt segment, because I just get into full-on writing mode. The thing that has always helped me is just to to channel in the harshness of Spanish, the harshness of saying things directly, without filter. There's a little interplay of phonetics that I sometimes bring up. The harshness of tease, the harshness of peace. But before I start getting all inspirational again, I do have a bit of technical advice for you. And this advice goes for everybody. So don't you think that just because this doesn't apply to you, you can't learn anything from this. And maybe I'm just zoning in on one thing you said in the email. But still, you mentioned how you have all these books of grammar and dictionaries and, all these like textbooks. And that's good. It is very good that you're reading that. You should also make it a point. Pick up books of poetry in English. Read fiction in English. See how other writers tackle it. If anything, to see how they go about doing it. Not to copy them, but to learn from them. To see how the language can be applied. Because I can tell you, for sure, that if you pick up any language, and your only experience with it is, grammar books, it's endlessly boring. Like, I'm just thinking of Spanish, and, trying to teach someone about all the different tenses. Oof. And conjugation. Ugh. You could hate Spanish if that was your only exposure to it. Experience other people's writing. Experience their magic. See how they play with the language. It is like examining another artist's work and seeing how they play with colors, with shapes, with forms. How they create more with less. Not to say that English is less, but to examine how everyone else plays with the same canvas, the same set of hues and pigments. That right there is the magic. To give one's formless voice shape on the blank page. I hope this helps. And thank you for your question. And now, I know I went long. I'm sorry that I went long, but I really liked that email. And I really liked all the points that we're making. And I felt like I found another way to talk about this conversation, which is a very important one. Because this is an international podcast. It goes out everywhere. And I know from the people who are supporting me through Patreon that a bunch of them are from all over the world. But yeah, I hope that helps. Or I hope that if anything, I gave you another point of view. Let's move over to the next question, which should be a shorter one. It is a technical question. When writing in first-person point of view, is there anything we can do to have less paragraphs and sentences that begin with the letter I? As in, I did this, I did that. And to this, I have an immediate, super quick, well, it's not super quick, but a super simple piece of advice, which is once again about questioning fiction and to analyze what is it that we're saying in the writing. This is most effective for first-person narration that is past tense. Because the thing I want you to notice is this. In writing first person, the problem of the I's emerges when in writing we're focusing a lot on relaying information. I did this, I did that, I walked over there, I did this. She said that, I said this. One immediate way to make the narration not only flow better but feel better is to stop and remind yourself of this. If the story is first person and is told in past tense, that means that your character, the narrator, is telling us their story, is telling us what they did. I know that I'm getting a little bit meta, but it helps to acknowledge, oh, the character is telling us this story. You don't have to overtly focus on the action per action, moment per moment of what your character is doing. Remind yourself that your narrator is a character, is a person. And they have their own way of telling stories, their own way of relaying that to the reader, to the viewer, to the person experiencing it, the person sitting across from them at the table, sitting next to them on the couch. The person who is listening, hearing, witnessing this story secondhand. When you start focusing less on I did this, then I did that, you can bring in the character. Not only show the actions, not only tell us what happened, but also show our character's reflection on the past. I want you to stop for a second and imagine how you would tell a story to someone. Imagine how you would explain to someone or relate to them what you did this last weekend, what you experienced, how it happened, what it made you feel. How would you do it in the form of a story? Would you go step by step? I went to work. I talked to my manager. I took my lunch. Of course you wouldn't. That's not how a first-person story would work. Yes, you would establish things, of course you would. You would set the stage so that the person you're talking to knows what you're talking about. But you would skim past the details that don't matter and focus, slow down time, center the camera, bring out the details on the things that are really important. To be entirely honest, sometimes, every time, let's be real. I'm level-headed enough that I can admit that probably the reason why the first writing session of a novel is always a pain in the butt is because I'm finding the voice of the narrator. I'm trying to learn how they talk. I'm trying to understand how is it that they tell the story. Because even when your story is third person, even when it's an omniscient narrator, it's still a person. It's still someone. They're talking. They're telling you a story. The narrator has a character. The narrator has a way of speaking, even though they may seem to be entirely colorless. They're a person. They are someone. They may be entirely invisible. They may be a ghost. They may be an elder god in the darkest depths of space. They may also just be an idea, the embodiment of justice, the embodiment of retribution, someone who speaks in a particular way. I really want to get you out of the mind space of you're the narrator. You are not the narrator of the story. You're writing, yes. Your name's on the cover, yes, but you're not the narrator. You are the person transcribing what's happening. You are the camera person. Not the director, not the scriptwriter. You're the one holding the camera. You're the one witnessing what's happening all around you. And this always helps. I have to remind myself of this. It's what helps. It's this element, because I feel that sometimes when we think of stories as books, when we think of them as books that have, pacings, that have, rising action and fall, and acts and climaxes, we forget that it's a story being told by someone. And sometimes there will be slow points. Sometimes there'll be points that they just skip over entire things. Because it's someone telling a story. And it always helps. It always helps to remind myself, because I get out of the headspace of I'm writing the story. I get out of the headspace of, well, it's been 2 chapters. Maybe it's about time that I introduce that element in the story again to remind the reader of that thing. I almost just slap my hand and I'm like, stop making this a book. It's a story. And just to clarify again, this is stuff that will be revised later on. Maybe I do need to introduce that element in the story again for the sake of the reader. Maybe I do. But I don't know yet. And it just helps me to remind myself that it's a story. It helps me push through. It somehow makes it feel more real. It makes it feel less like it's about me and more that it's about someone else, another entity, some form of other idea. And I'm just simply capturing what's happening. Some may argue it feels more impersonal, but I like it. I really like the idea of just capturing what's going on. I feel like in the writing sessions when I was writing like I was possessed. The sessions in which writing by hand, I just filled the pages without realizing it. Were the moments where I was just caught in transcribing the voice of that narrator, that invisible person, telling me the story piece by piece. Now, I know that I've really strayed from the point. I really wanted to talk about this because it's also very fresh in my mind as I'm writing right now. I don't think it's a problem to have a lot of sentences that start with I. I think that part of the problem, and the reason why I wanted to wait to bring this up, is that like when you're writing a story and you're looking at the first letter of every paragraph and you're like, oh, a lot of them start with I. If you're in the first draft, I would like to inspire you to not care and to just keep writing. When you stop and you look at your story and you look at all the I's, you're looking at your story like a book again. You're looking at it as a piece of media that you're presenting to someone, and you're thinking to yourself, well, aesthetically pleasing, I'm starting with the same letter every time. And you're thinking of that in aesthetics as opposed to flow and presentation. What are you saying? Maybe you have to have those first couple sentences start with I. Maybe there's no other way to present that information. Or maybe you should stop looking at what you wrote 5 minutes ago and just keep on writing. My ultimate piece of advice, and the one that I feel is like the very core of this. Think of your narrator as a person. Think how they would tell the story. If not only to bring a little bit more color to the narration, but also to just help them with flow. Like, I can't begin to tell you how many times I've been saved by, like, being stuck, feeling as though I have nowhere to go, feeling as though I have completely lost the thread of the story, and then ask myself, how would the narrator keep on talking? How could the narrator pull this around? How would the narrator begin the next chapter? Is it color? Is it description? Is it just jumping in? It is almost a step removed from acting. How would the narrator begin chapter 1? How would this narrator, who is a person, who is a character, begin the story? If they sat right across from you at the coffee shop, if they sat next to you at the bar, how would they begin the story? I also do have to admit that this is a problem that is a lot harder to deal with in stories that are present tense. Because in that situation, yes, the story is happening moment to moment. But I would like to inspire you to still think of this idea, this concept, of looking at the narrator in your story as a character. Someone who may be present in the world itself. Or maybe not. Maybe not. But it helps. I can tell you without question that it has helped me tons. Man, what a weird couple of questions. And I'm not saying weird in a weird way. Or rather, you know what? Take it back. Rewind. What a couple of weird answers. They're very Max answers. They are absolutely answers only that I would give you. Ah, man, it's so much fun. It's not even in a bad way. Man, I had so much fun. Those were some really, really fun. It's always a delight to externalize my feelings. It's always a delight to find what is it that has worked for me. And this is the reason why I can't do a script. This is just absolutely just opening my heart and just telling you exactly what I feel. I hope that you enjoyed today's questions. If you want to send me one, there's an email in the description down below. You do you. You do you. Let's move over to the prompt. This episode's going long. I'm sorry. I'm going to try to keep the prompt relatively brief. Because now, today, we're going back to the original style of prompts. A prompt that is quite literally a story idea that I had. I wrote it down. I shoved it in the envelope. I literally have like a very wide envelope, and on the back of it I just wrote loose thoughts. There's a bunch of like single sentences in there, like scraps of paper with a sentence in it, and it's just in there, almost like a hat, just full of like strings of thoughts. And there's one, and the way that this is gonna go. Because generally, I just give you a scenario and I'm like, okay, let's walk step by step. How would you tackle it? Today, I'm gonna sell this story idea to you. And we're gonna talk about twists and turns. The core of this particular moment is for you to think about stories. Think critically about stories. To imagine what you would do. Because thinking about stories is as important as actually writing the stories themselves. Okay, maybe not as important, but really close. Writing should be the most important thing. And sometimes when we're caught in the midst of living, where we are, going to work, going to school, taking care of our kids, we forget about writing. We get so lost in the moment because we're always living, always going somewhere, always doing something. We forget to think about stories, to stretch our creative muscles, to imagine what we would do. When you imagine something, you make it real in your mind. And that right there gets you a step closer to be able to capture that in words on the page. This here is a 100% max story idea. It is something weird, something bizarre, and something that I just honestly don't have the time to write right now. So I'm just going to give it to you. I'm just going to put this message in this bottle and throw it into the sea. Take it, make it your own, make it something exciting. Twist it, morph it, combine it with other story ideas. Make it yours. Have fun. You don't have to write it, but you must think about what you would do. What would you do with it? As I talked earlier, it is an unspoken belief of Western culture, of the United States of America. The idea of permanence. It is the sentiment that who we are now will always be this. That we will never die. That time is transient, but that it does not affect us. This idea that the world has always been one way, or that it will always be one way. A bit of an unspoken belief. This sentiment of permanence. Things being the same. And I feel that part of it is because part of American culture is always living in the moment. Always, one can weave that into the idea of individualism. It's always about you. It's always about the now. Living in the present and all that stuff. That does not carry into other cultures. Especially cultures that believe or that embrace the sentiment of a cyclical life, a cycle. Embracing the idea of life and death, of being aware of one's mortality, being aware of the passing of time, the sentiment that what it is now will not be later. And one may argue that embracing that can lead to a happier life, to acknowledge change, to acknowledge the end of things, of all things. And thinking about this, I was reminded of an old concept. The idea of cycles is something that, like, if you're American and even as you think about this, you're like, no, I hate this idea. It's because it's part of our culture. It's part of our culture to want things to be the same, to remain permanent. The idea that we will not perish, that we will always exist. And meanwhile, there's other cultures that fully acknowledge the idea that, there are cycles to life. And civilizations rise and fall. Today I want to bring the idea of Dusk and Dawn. I want to provide you with two characters. This is the way that I picture the story. The story is a series of scenes separated tens of thousands of hundreds of millions of years apart. Every scene is between the same two characters, meeting each other at the climax of every cycle. Sometimes these two characters fight. Sometimes these two characters talk. Sometimes they say nothing at all. But whenever the cycle is about to come to an end, whether the golden age of whatever civilization's around is about to come to an end, one of the characters arrives. And this marks the end of everything. This marks the end of everything that exists. Not the immediate end, not the dropping of a bomb or the pressing of a button, but the acknowledgement that this civilization is slowly going to end. That their prime has passed. That their youth is gone. That the sand that remains in the clock is past its half point. These two characters could represent ideals. These two characters could represent the cycle itself. These two characters could represent gods or some form of divine beings. I don't like the idea of labeling them as evil and good, because the cycle of life itself is not good or bad. Death is not inherently a bad thing. And that's actually a very, very Mexican thing, having been raised... and I talked about this recently during the Halloween episode, but... by the way, that sound you're hearing in the background is my chinchillas making noise, or my two lovely little gray children. The Day of the Dead holiday is an acknowledgement of death, an acknowledgement of one's mortality. And, some people see that as being kind of, is macabre the right word? I guess dark, to acknowledge that you are writing a child's name on a sugar skeleton. To mark that is their treat, that candy is theirs, but it also possesses their name, much like they too will one day just be a skeleton. And I know that people are like, oh, but that's finding meaning, but that's the meaning within itself. And that's before talking about, altars and, the imagery of the dead and all those other things. But it's the acknowledgement that time will pass, and life will pass. And sorry if I'm getting super real with you right now, but that's the point of this whole story. The thing that excites me the most about this story is the conversation between these two characters. The Warrior of Dawn and the Warrior of Dusk. The Warrior of Dawn who arrives always just when the ruins have settled, when that civilization is forgotten, when the whole world is dead, arrives and says, it is time now for things to begin again. Those people, their lives, their monuments, their structures, their stories, their words, gone forever. Erased. Dust. Nothing anymore. The Warrior of Dawn arrives and tells to the Warrior of Dusk who's been there, sitting at the throne of the world, and tells them, it's time for me to start things again. They switch places. Millions of years later, 100 years later, countless moons and suns, the Warrior of Dusk arrives in a different time and a different place. At the peak of the civilization, of this world, spires of gold, kingdoms in the sky, civilizations across the stars, the Warrior of Dusk arrives at the throne room again and tells their old friend, it's time now for the decline. And it is now, as I'm reflecting on the story, because it's always about finding what's exciting for you. And to me, what's the most exciting is that conversation. I think that sometimes they would fight, because I like to believe that they're still human, that they feel, that they understand. I don't even know if they live forever. Maybe they're just born again. Maybe they come with the cycle. Maybe they're not. Maybe they don't even look the same. But I love the idea of this conversation. What is it like? And this here you could say is the nugget, the best part of it, the tastiest, the most delicious core of the treat. To ask the question, what would life be like from the point of view of this person? What would it be like to find yourself resolute, to realize your meaning, your path, is to walk up the steps of that ancient place, of that imaginary room, step through a door that doesn't exist, with the goal of marking the end of everything. Not just this city. Not just this planet. Everything. Everything to start again. And I think about that. One of these ridiculous ideas that comes to me. The cycle is such a not Western thing. Because it makes us feel uneasy. It makes us feel horrible. To question, to think about, one may argue, the futility of our actions. What does it matter what we build? What does it matter what we create when there are ultimately castles of sand and the ocean's waves will never tire and time will always tick and tock no matter what we do? The grains of sand in the clock trickle down past our fingers. We cannot stop them. What is it like? How does one find purpose? How can one who represents this part of the cycle, the passing of the torch, even if the torch must be put out as part of the process, what is it like? What is it like to search for meaning across a multitude of eras, of lifetimes, of big bangs and whimpers? I really didn't want that prompt to be a downer, but I realized halfway that I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot this is sad. This is not a sad, because death is not always a sad thing, and it's not a sad or negative thing to learn to value what we have. If anything, it's one of the things that I learned at my youngest was not only to value life, but to value those we have and the joys that we partake in, the wine of the moment. I know it is scary to know that things won't always last forever, but this is true of the good things and the bad things. We suffer in silence sometimes. We suffer alone, but the suffering passes. Winter comes and spring returns. That is why we must cherish what we have. The people who make us happy. The little things, no matter how small, that bring us joy. We cherish them now, for they are temporary. A flower caught in bloom. And we must remember that no matter how bad things may seem, they too are transient. I know my answer. I know what I would say. I don't know what the characters would say, though. I don't know what all of my characters would say. I am certain that some of their answers would be downers. And others, well, they could probably bring me to tears. But this is the power of fiction. The power of writing. To be able to tackle that fantastical scenario. And in spite of it being magic and imagining, to be able to bring to the reader something they can carry with them beyond the page. This was not the tone that I expected the podcast to take. Hi there. I didn't want it to be so serious. Well, at least, let me just... Alright, well, that story idea is done. The demon has been exorcised. I've told you about it. It's yours now. Take the story. Do whatever you want with it. I'm never gonna write it. I am most likely never going to have time to write that story, so you should probably take it. And make it yours. Make it something way different. Change it up. Have fun with it. Maybe there are no characters. Maybe it's not about countless cycles happening over and over, but rather just the very end and the beginning of another. I don't know. Go crazy. Have fun. Think about stories. Experiment. And seek to find answers. Alright. This podcast has gone for so long, and I would like to apologize. I had a lot of fun with the questions. I had a lot of fun talking about my week, even though I'm still ashamed. And I hope you enjoyed the prompt. It's a weird prompt, but it's the most Max prompt, though. Like, sometimes I write prompts, and I'm like, yep, I came up with that. I'm not saying no one else could come up with that, but I look at it and I'm like, that is something that came out of my brain. Because it's just such a Max thing. But anyhow, hi there. I want to thank you for watching. This is a weird episode. I think there will still be one more episode of the regular podcast, or there may be more. I don't know. My plans keep changing. My family keeps changing the plans, and because of that, I keep having to change my plans for you. There will be podcasts, though. There will be a podcast every week. I'm not going on hiatus. Worst comes to worst, I'll just record some episodes in advance and I will schedule them. Done and done. Every Friday at 7 a.m., that is Pacific Standard Time, or just Pacific Time, there will be a podcast of Omakase going up. It may be a bonus episode here and there. I think I'm going to do an episode on the lessons that I learned this year. But yeah, no. And there will also, by the time this goes up, in like 2 days, the new Omakase Extra is going to go up as well. Going over the 10 reasons to keep writing. So that's exciting. Keep an eye out for that. And for now, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go get going with my day. I'm going to step into the end of the video club, where I'm going to give a shout out to every person who makes this podcast a reality. But before I do that, thank you for watching. Thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me. And I hope you have a lovely day. Sorry for the depressing prompt. Alright. Moving on. The end of the video club, where I give a shout out to every person who has supported me, whether by treating me to a cup of coffee or pledging $1 to patreon.com/mkieran. I must be honest with you. I am being very reserved. That's not true. I'm always being myself. What I mean to say is that someone out there may say, Max, I know what day you're recording this podcast. I know that it is the 7th of December, 2018. I know what today means to you, Max. You appear very reserved. You're taking your time speaking about the podcast. This podcast episode is longer than usual, Max. Aren't you in a rush? Don't you want to do the thing that you talked about, Max? Isn't today the day that Smash Bros. Ultimate releases? Yes, but I am showing a lot of patience. I am taking my time. Primarily because Kitty's not home, and we promised we're going to play that game together, and I am a very good spouse. I have patience. The game's there. It's over there. The game's on the bed. I can see it. It's still shrink-wrapped. I may actually pop it into the Switch so that it automatically updates, but I am not pressing play. Absolutely not. I am a good spouse, and I promised I would not play the game. And look at me. Haven't even opened it. What is this bit? What is this bit, Max? Well, all I'm saying is that you should all be very proud of me. And you should all send me words of praise, because I'm being a very good spouse. No. I make it sound like I'm dying to open the game. I'm not. Mostly because I want to play with my lovely spouse. Oh no! I can feel the lovey-doviness coming out. This year has been amazing. If anything, because I finally married the loveliest person in the whole world. And she makes me so happy, and we just love playing games together. We played the new Pokemon game together, like we played co-op the entire game. It was so much fun. Oh my god. It was so much fun. We completed the Pokédex together. It was so much fun. That is the first time in my entire life. I've been playing Pokemon since Pokemon Blue, back when I was a wee little gay. And I, for the first time ever, completed the Pokédex. 152 Pokemon logged in on the Pokédex. From number 1 Bulbasaur all the way to number... Well, it's actually number like 850 something. But 152 Meltan. We got Mew. We got all the version exclusives. I am loading Patreon. I'm not going crazy. Okay, someone out there is like, Max, when are the shoutouts gonna happen? Listen, you're in the end of the video club already, okay? All rules are off, okay? Right now it's you and Matt. It's me and you time, okay? And now everything here is bonus. The show's over. The people who just want advice are out. Now it's just you and me, okay? Now you get the real Max. The real Max comes out to play. I want to give a shout out. Could you hear me putting the tie back on? Could you hear me, like, fixing my tie? I'm not wearing a tie. I'm not wearing a suit. Are you silly? Are you silly? Are you silly? I'm wearing a dress suit. That's what I'm wearing. I was gonna make a joke about heels, but then I'm reminded that my amazing wife, who is taller than me, loves wearing heels. And we went shopping yesterday. No, 2 days ago. We went shopping 2 days ago. And she was wearing heels. And oh my gosh, she's already so much taller than me. And then she puts on heels and I'm like, I just feel like a hobbit now. I feel like we're gonna go take the ring to Mordor now. Let's just start the shoutouts. I want to give a big shout out to the people who make this show possible. These people are supporting me on Patreon so that I can make stupid jokes here on the end screen. A. Howard, Atalac, Alistair Baywood, Elisa Dudley, Amanda Stevens, Amelia, Amy Palmer, Angela, Anyexo Hoshi, Biting the Sun, Blarg, Brenda, C.E. Richards, Caitlin, and the other Caitlin, Kathy Lindsay. I really love doing, like, the other Caitlin. I make it sound as though, like Caitlin and the other Caitlin have just double-crossed me. Like, you know, like, the submarine's about to sink, and, you know, I'm tied to, like, the whatever is the thing that actually controls the submarine, and Caitlin's like, it was me, Max. It was me all along, but I didn't do it alone, and then the other Caitlin steps from behind her. It's like, it was me. And I'm like, the other Caitlin. I knew the two of you were in cahoots. Why are we in a submarine? Listen, okay, I don't think about my bits this far in advance. This is how you know I don't have a script, okay? Was that joke funny? I don't know. Kathy Lindsay, Lee Shadra, Christiane, Christine Dennis, Kristen Lofton, thank you for supporting me on Patreon and bumping up your pledge. That's really sweet. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Clem Pastor, Eleanor, Erasos. I keep saying it, but it doesn't feel right. Erasos. Erasos' name has 3 exclamation marks, which I try to encapsulate every time that I read out their name. Geoffrey Raby, Gilbert Gaudreau, Hero Song, Irina Phoenix, Janosch Hebatsky, J. Tana Kirkwood, Jeffrey James Williams, Jay Sawicki, Juan Nunes, K.M. Anderson, Kamishwar Rao Shaluri, Kaylee, Kiel, Lacey, Lear Killo, M.T. Locatelli, Mark Maruska, Mary Foster Smith, Nicola, Nicole Grissom, Nicolay, Noam Sahar, Novels and Tomes, Pablo, Pat Eichson, Polly Craftwell, Raquel Fernandez, Rhiannon August, Roa, Shimmertails, Sky D. White, Soulmuse, Sylvia Latilla, Synexia, and Wendy Christopher. Can you guys hear the helicopter outside? They're coming for me. They know. They're like, Max, you're arrested. You're arrested because of your podcast crimes. And I'm like, I mean, you know, I knew this was gonna happen. I just didn't think it was gonna be this fast. Arrested for podcast crimes. Someone make that image macro. I believe, yeah, you want the image macro for that Pop Team Epic comic that is like arrested for YouTube crimes, but instead is arrested for podcast crimes, and then just put my face over. Is it Mimiku or Popuko? I think it's Mimiku. Well, that's a great thing to look up. Pop Team Epic, because Popuko is the big girl. Popuko is the big girl, isn't it? Kitty's Popuko, and I am. No, Popuko's the short girl. Oh my god, Pipimi is the big girl. Kitty's Pipimi. I'm Popuko. If you're like wondering, like, oh, what's the height difference between you and Kitty? Pipimi and Popuko. Look up Pop Team Epic, Popuko, and Pipimi. Anyhow, hey, take care of yourself. Give yourself the license to think about stories, to be creative, and above all, the month's ramping up. Things are gonna get real busy. And they're gonna get real complicated. Give yourself the chance to just take it easy. If you do one thing between now and next episode, please stop being so hard on yourself. Okay? Okay.